One of the most bittersweet feelings is when you cram for an exam or pull an all-nighter and then the morning of, your professor emails you and says the exam is canceled. That's how I feel with this video. I did a bunch of research on these three wide receivers. I put together my thoughts, and then I missed Labor Day, man. Just couldn't get the video out. I apologize to anyone who was waiting for it, which is probably nobody. But if you're like me and you're a madman, after your fantasy drafts, you probably go on YouTube, you look up highlights of all the players you drafted, you're looking up information from beat reporters, you're looking to fall in love or confirm the biases of your picks, right? So maybe this video might actually be helpful for you, even if you've already had your draft. If not, I'm sorry, but we're going to talk about Amon-ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and CeeDee Lamb. We're going to compare all three players. We're going to talk about their profiles, talk about their past performances, talk about the current situation on their team. We're also going to talk about some concerns around each player. And then I'm going to give you my ranks for those three players. So maybe if you haven't had your draft, hopefully this helps you. If it does help you by the end of the video, or you just enjoy the way I do these videos, I'd really appreciate a like and a sub or any feedback. Without wasting any more of your time, let's hop into the first player on the list, and it's going to be Tyreek Hill. What can I say about Tyreek Hill, man? He's been one of the best fantasy players in the past like 5+ years since he was with the Chiefs. He's an absolute explosive, dynamic, amazing wide receiver. He's the perfect type of prototype player that you want in a fantasy football player. He's going to explode and get you those long touchdowns. He also gets a lot of receptions, which is actually insane that he does both. Typically you'd get one or the other. So he finished as wide receiver 2 in 2023. We're just going to look at 2023 for now. He had 119 receptions for 1,799 yards and 13 touchdowns. Insane. He was really pushing for that 2K yardage, like he was saying it before the season. So yeah, we should have known. We should have known that he was going to be an absolute beast, right? He's been consistently dominant throughout his entire career. He's got game-breaking speed, as I mentioned. He can score from anywhere on the field. He's attached to an extremely explosive offense in the Dolphins. Mike McDaniel knows how to get the ball into the hands of his players with the opportunity for them to run after the catch and for them to create after the catch. It's like a big part of the 49ers tree, right? Which Mike McDaniel comes from that 49ers tree. Another thing that's actually really interesting for the Dolphins as a whole is that a lot of people expect them to be in much tighter games this season. They only have a 51 projected point differential by Mike Clay in his projections. For anybody curious, Mike Clay does these projections every year. He projects out like team scoring, defense, overall ratings, strength of schedule, all that kind of stuff. He like sets the industry standard. He's somebody that a lot of other people really like base their rankings off of. You know, that puts them about 9th in point differential, meaning there's like, 8 other teams with a bigger point differential. And they're not projected to be as dominant as they were last season, which means that they should be in tighter games, right? Like I know Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill really did not score a lot of points in like the second halves of games, like the entire season. They have some of the lower fantasy outputs. So maybe that gets fixed, right? Maybe we're not playing with like 50% players, right? Maybe we have a full season or a full games in a full season of Tyreek Hill. And I think what that also means is that, the running back production was really high last year. They had like 23 rushing touchdowns on the season, which is like really high for a team like Miami, who everyone thought would be like a pass first team. So I think like regression to the averages is probably in store, which means there should be more production for the wide receivers. And here are the worries about Tyreek Hill. Dolphins' strength of schedule is really brutal. It's 26th in the NFL, which is, gets the cherry on top of that is that they see the Jets, the Texans, San Francisco, Cleveland, and then the Jets again in weeks 13 to 17. So most people have their fantasy playoffs in those weeks. And, it includes some weeks before the fantasy playoffs, which are also tough. So you're looking at like a potential like slugfest going into the fantasy playoffs, right? Next concern is that Jalen Waddle's continued growth. I think a lot of people have Jalen Waddle as like a my guy or a fantasy MVP. That could potentially stunt Tyreek Hill's ceiling, right? I know we could see like both guys easily score in the top 12 this season, and I think that's like a decent bet to make, but just the fact that Jalen Waddle might be nipping at his toes a little bit more is just one more little like check mark, right, in the concern column. And then the three-headed running back room. So I already mentioned that there should be regression in the running back production, but you have like three pretty good dudes that the Dolphins really want to feed, and it's Achane, Mostert, and Wright, their new rookie. So you have like good, talented running backs, right? I wouldn't say it's necessarily a strike against Tyreek Hill, but at the end of the day, it's just another mouth to feed, especially Achane, right? He's just another mouth to feed, a dude that they might glance at right in the red zone a little bit more than they, maybe in the past it'd be like, all right, Tyreek or bust. Well, now they have a few other dudes that they can turn to. So last concern about Tyreek Hill is that he is 30 years old. Father time comes for everyone. He's had a hand brace for a few weeks going into the regular season. Slightly concerning. I don't think like a hand injury is the most concerning type of injury for a dude like Tyreek Hill. I think if it was like a lower body extremity type injury, we'd be a little bit more concerned, but it's just something to think about. And you know, the age cliff comes for everyone, man, and it usually comes pretty suddenly. Like when I think about Julio Jones, he was showing some signs of age, but you know, he was still like a top 15 wide receiver. And then suddenly he was like actually unusable, like just fully droppable, unusable. So I'm not saying that's going to happen with Tyreek. I'm not saying the cliff is going to come this season, but there's always the possibility where it's all about creating a risk portfolio around a player. And it's just an extra little risk thing where people always say avoid older wide receivers. It's just a small little thing in that category. So moving on now to CeeDee Lamb. I'll try to speed this up a little bit. 2020, so we're like let's talk about this like profile, and we're going to go back to 2022. So Kellen Moore arrives to Dallas. Lamb absolutely pops off. He's the wide receiver 6 with 107 receptions for 1359 yards and 9 touchdowns. He kind of unlocks this Dallas Cowboys offense. We see the rapport between Dak and Lamb really get established in 2022. And then leading into 2023, we had big expectations for kind of Dallas as a whole, especially the run game with Tony Pollard taking over. They shipped Zeke out. The run game is decrepit. It's absolutely a weak point in their offense, right? Tony Pollard wasn't bad individually, but just their run game as a whole just really wasn't too effective all season. It started to get better near the end of the season, but that led to Lamb having 181 targets, 135 receptions, 1,749 yards, and 12 touchdowns. So he just builds on everything he did from receptions, yards, touchdowns. Chemistry continued to be built with Dak. Insane, incredible season. A lot of sharps in the industry really saw this coming. CeeDee Lamb was kind of like the Garrett Wilson of 2023, like that dude that people were getting at the end of round 1, who everyone was like, dude, he's gonna make that next step, right? This Dallas offense is gonna be humming. And, you know, you can apply the same thing to Garrett Wilson, but this is not a Garrett Wilson video, so we will get back to CeeDee Lamb. The run game is still shit. That's a positive in CeeDee Lamb's favor. There are no big wide receiver names behind him, and there are no running backs on the team that really, like, generate excitement from anyone, right? Zeke Elliott, Dalvin Cook, Rico Dowdle, okay, a little bit of a sleeper, a little bit exciting. Could be a dude that could, you know, emerge as like a nice late running back target, but for the most part, there's no one, right? It's Brandon Cooks. It's a Mike Tolbert or Jalen Tolbert, fucking Steve Tolbert. I don't even know his name. Tolbert, right? Like, that's who CeeDee Lamb's going to be competing with. But Dallas is still projected to be a top offense, a top team, top defense. So they need to get production from somewhere. I think it's going to be CeeDee Lamb yet again. I think he's actually in an even better situation than he was last season, because now you don't have Pollard, who was really seen as a receiving back. You know, you have 2 old running backs and 1 like unproven young and what many people think is a bad running back in Rico Dowdle. So I don't imagine Brandon Cooks suddenly being like, all right, dude, I found the fountain of youth. I'm back to my 26-year-old version. It's like he's just a year older now. And I know he did have some touchdown equity last season, Brandon Cooks. Actually, surprisingly, like looking at his profile, he had like, I think 9 touchdowns. I'll pull it up. I'm probably wrong, but I'll pull it up and throw it behind me. Or I won't, and I'll just forget. Yeah. So strength of schedule for quarterbacks is very enticing. It's very juicy. 10th for quarterbacks, 9th for wide receivers. Perfect. Absolutely perfect, which means it's not so good that they blow people out, but it's in the top 10 in both categories. Perfectly what we want to see, right? When you have a good defense to also lean on, they're going to be getting you the ball in good field position. You don't have such a difficult schedule ahead of you. You're not going to be, you know, facing super tough secondaries all season. It's just music, man. It's music. It's like the first time I heard the Beatles. Well, let's talk about some worries of CeeDee Lamb. Everybody's got worries, right? Usage regression is always possible. Everything I just said leads us to believe that regression is not going to happen, that the situation just seems to be better. But regression can happen, right? Like they could just get younger guys involved. Touchdowns just might not go his way. Yardage might not go his way. He might get double covered way more because now that there's not as much talent on the team, you know, the offensive line is not as good. They do lose Tyron Smith. That's his name, I believe, to the Jets. So that could be, you know, the offense could struggle a little bit more. Like it could be a less effective offense. and that will impact CeeDee Lamb as much as we don't like to believe it will. Now, they're projected to be 12-5 with a really good defense. Does that mean they're going to be blowing teams out? I think with the stuff that I just said about having a less effective offensive line, a run game that really is nothing to write home about, I don't know if there's going to be too many blowouts. I think they do like win these games, but potentially shootouts, man. Like, I know their defense is going to be really good, but not having a run game will give the other teams the ball with a lot of time on the clock. You know, not as much time of possession on Dallas's side. I could be wrong, right? Maybe their run game is really good. These are all just theories. At the end of the day, nobody really knows what the fuck is going to happen. And another small concern is that can Lamb reach the top 3 wide receivers? You need to boost his red zone involvement and touchdowns significantly. That's not true at all. He's already in the top 3. I don't know why I wrote that. Forget that. That wraps it up for CeeDee Lamb. Those are the main concerns. It's really just like production regression. Like, he needs to just keep being a beast, right, to return the value of being one of the top drafted wide receivers. That's the thing. He's being drafted at his cost, and he has to hit those metrics again. He has to hit those numbers, which that's always tough in fantasy football, right? A dude to like continue doing what he's doing rather than a guy to like jump up. Like, I think Ja'Marr Chase, for example, could jump up into the CeeDee Lamb arena, while CeeDee Lamb has to continue doing it. I think he's set up to do it though. So that's small foreshadowing on what I think. Next on the list is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. I already covered St. Brown in a previous video. He popped off the second half of his rookie season, ended as wide receiver 21, really built, you know, as the season went on, helped a lot of people win championships actually in 2021. And then in year 2, 2022, he was the wide receiver 7, 106 receptions, 1,161 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Cements himself as the wide receiver 1, really the only guy on the team kind of that season. And then in year 3, which is 2023, he was an incredible draft pick, a tremendous value. He was a dude that a lot of people were targeting as that guy that can jump into the next tier of wide receivers. Finishes as wide receiver 3. He won people championships. I think that's the most important part that we need to remember. And what I mean with that is that in the fantasy playoffs, he scores 24, 28, and 22 fantasy points in half PPR, or in full PPR, sorry. Absolutely massive. Just a small little piece of information that nobody gives a fuck about. I traded Amon-Ra St. Brown last season for Ja'Marr Chase, and the dude who had Amon-Ra St. Brown ended up winning the fucking chip. I'm still salty. I'm working in the salt mines. He's a clear wide receiver 1. The offense is built around him. I know there's a lot of exciting pieces around him, but at the end of the day, I think he will be the top option. He'll be the first read on most crucial or critical plays, which is what you want, right? Now, Lions have the 6th easiest strength of schedule for wide receivers and 9th for quarterbacks. Very similar to the Cowboys. Very optimistic strength of schedule for them. And another little piece is that they have the 18th ranked for running backs. So that might help the pass game, right? It might cause them to become a pass funnel team. If they have a slightly more difficult run strength of schedule, which could help the receiving game. So moving on now to the worries about Amon-Ra St. Brown. As I already mentioned this in the last video, but Jameson Williams emergence, so he's getting a lot of training camp buzz. People are expecting Williams to really cement himself as a wide receiver 2 and be a lot more involved, get a lot more volume. Could impact Brown. Gibbs is also expected to get a lot more work and become this like dynamic receiving back, kind of this Alvin Kamara type dude. I mean, he's been getting Alvin Kamara comps since he was, you know, drafted. So let's see if that actually comes to fruition. Third thing is that Laporta, sophomore bump. He was already the tight end 1, and we expect a sophomore bump. You could say he might regress. I don't know. We'll see, right? I think, but people are at the very least, we're expecting him to be involved. So that is a small knock against Amon-Ra St. Brown. We just have some concerns about, you know, having a lot of mouths to feed. We're expecting all this uptrend of all these different players. How does St. Brown continue producing at his level then? Something's got to give, right? Next thing is that an easy strength of schedule means maybe they might blow more teams out, right? They're expected to be like a conference leader this season. They have a really good run game, you know, improving defense, a really good passing game. What if they're going to be blowing teams out? I don't know if St. Brown's going to be as crucial to the team's, you know, victories, especially in like positive game scripts. It might just be give it a fucking David Montgomery and let him pop off. Next thing, does he have high touchdown upside? I think he had like a best scenario possible outcome last season, right? Like he scored a lot of touchdowns last season. That's why he ended as a wide receiver 3, in addition to his high volume. Like going into the season, we all expected Brown to be like this high volume dude, perfect for PPR leagues. But, you know, the knock on him was that we don't know if he can get a lot of touchdowns. And he exceeded his touchdown projections, and that's why he was the wide receiver 3. It's essentially what happened. It's like kind of similar to what happens to Keenan Allen every season. I mean, obviously not this season, but Keenan Allen has always been a dude where we're like, I'll draft him in the 3rd, 4th round because he's going to get so much volume. But, touchdowns have never really come that easy. And then Keenan gets unlocked, and then he ends up the wide receiver 5 or whatever. So touchdown upside is just a little bit concerning. And then another thing, this is kind of like subjective, kind of ambiguous, but like, can you imagine him as the wide receiver 1? Can you imagine him having like 14 touchdowns, 1,800 yards, like pretty much doing what CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill can do? He'd have to improve pretty much in every metric at the moment. I'll show you guys the metrics in a little bit. So before I give you my rankings and I tell you my conclusion of what I think about all these players, we're going to look at this quick chart that I made about the 3 players, and it compares their last 3 seasons to each other. A little bit unfair to St. Brown because obviously he was a rookie. He didn't really have like a full allotment of slots in his rookie season, so it's a little bit unfair. But, I just wanted to have a look at some of the metrics that mattered a little bit more predictive type stuff. So in terms of games played, they all played similar amount of games. Tyreek Hill kind of blows everybody out of the water in terms of yardage, other than CeeDee Lamb last year, obviously. It probably matters most to look at 2023, right? When it comes to like stuff like yardage, like touchdowns, like targets. But we see that Tyreek Hill, like the consistency, man, when you do look at those 3-year averages, you just see like impressive consistency from like targets per game. He beats everybody. Yards per game, he beats everybody. Touchdowns per game, he beats everybody. Now, you can easily look at all this stuff and say, yeah, but he's also 30 now. So if you're going to look at 3-year averages, taking into account the fact that he should see a downtrend on all of those things, right? It is a little bit unfair to look at averages, I will say. But something that I do like looking at, and the fantasy industry says is very indicative of like future performance, or at least of like talent. It's like talent in a vacuum is best defined, or one of the better metrics to determine it is yards per route run. To quickly explain what it is, it's essentially just that, like, if you take volume out of the question and just looking at the routes that that receivers are running, how many yards do they get per route? And that shows us like actual talent. It's actually a benchmark about talent. And Tyreek Hill, he blows everybody out of the water, not just these 2 names. He's got 3.82 in 2023. That means when he is running routes, he is just he's either getting the ball or getting incredible yardage. So that's it for me, an indicator of future success. But again, looking at the strength of schedule, you see that 30th against quarterbacks and 26th against wide receivers for the Dolphins is concerning. And that leads us now to the conclusion, guys. So Tyreek's stats are out of this world, but he's 30 years old and he's usually won off of speed. He's never been really known as like a route technician or like an incredible route runner. He's just like, I'm going to get behind you. I'm going to get past you. I'm going to get around you. So what if his speed kind of like starts to diminish, starts to dip even just a little bit, right? Like it's all about marginal wins in the NFL. Another thing, only 10 wide receivers over 30 have finished in the top 10 in the past 10 years. So Antonio Brown was the last guy to do it in 2018. So there's been quite a few years since a over 30-year-old wide receivers finished in the top 10. Now, with that in mind, how much better will he be than CeeDee Lamb for you to be okay with that risk? So if you're like, nah, I don't give a fuck, Tyreek Hill is that dude, he's him, he's going to be that over 30-year-old wide receiver who's going to be in the top 10. I just know it. Okay, no problem, but it's still risky. And is he going to be so much better than Tyreek Hill for you to absorb that risk and for you to eat that risk and for you to take that leap of faith? Probably, maybe, I don't know. He wasn't that much better than CeeDee Lamb last year. He was only the wide receiver 1 by a small margin. So you're adding another year of age and you're improving CeeDee Lamb's situation. Before we get into that, let's talk about St. Brown. As I mentioned, less touchdown ceiling, emerging Jameson, emerging Gibbs, emerging Laporta. CeeDee Lamb's on a team with half a run game. CeeDee is the wide receiver 1. Yeah, a lot of people disagree about, minimizing risk. So let's get to Amon-Ra St. Brown now. He's got less of a touchdown ceiling, as I mentioned. His yardage should probably not be able to contend with CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill, to be honest. And he's got, a much more crowded room to deal with. I know Tyreek Hill also has a crowded room, but I think that the threat of Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and, Raheem Mostert and all these guys, I think they're much more significant than what CeeDee Lamb has to contend with. And with that said, my rankings go as follows. It's CeeDee Lamb as the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. It's just the lowest risk for the highest upside. Number 2 is Tyreek Hill. I think he has the highest upside for the risk that you're taking. So as I mentioned, he's over 30, so that's a risky profile. But the upside, if he does break that mold and he is that wide receiver over 30 to break it, then I think he breaks it by like an equal amount that he broke it last season. I think he produces similar to what he produced last season. Maybe small drop-offs, but small drop-offs in Tyreek Hill's game from last season still puts him above what I think Amon-Ra St. Brown can actually do. I really do think that. I think a lot of people are I can already see the YouTube comments. Like, people are going to be disagreeing and say, no, Amon-Ra St. Brown's on a better offense. He's the most, he's the alpha wide receiver 1. He's still young. But it's all about risk, man. It's all about mitigating risk. Like, he's an absolute safe pick. He's so safe. But can he compete with Lamb? Like, truly ask yourself that. Can he compete with what Lamb can do when it comes to touchdowns, yardage, like target share as well? I don't know, man. I think it's pretty clear. I think it's CeeDee Lamb by far number 1, Tyreek Hill number 2, and St. Brown number 3. Those are my rankings. I'm super excited to hear what you guys think. If you did like this video, why don't you give me a like, give me a comment, give me a sub, dude. Subs really help. I'm trying to grow the channel. I hope you guys like the format and you like how, my analysis a little bit. I'm always looking to improve. I'm always taking people's feedback. So I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.